There we go. Today's topic is asset management, building a foundation for smart discussions. Our guest speaker is Elizabeth Young. She's a GIS professional, GISP. She's been with the city of Fort Worth for a long time. She's an IT manager. She's worked in various different capacities with the city for 16 years and has over 23 years of geospatial GIS experience. So she started working with the asset management arena for the city of Fort Worth in 2009. So Elizabeth, we really appreciate you sitting in with us today. So if anybody has any questions, put them into the chat window, and we're going to go ahead and let Elizabeth take over, and appreciate you being here.
Thanks. So like you said, I've been doing this for about 9 years, asset management, and it started off slow, and it ramps its way up pretty quickly. So just to give you a little information on the background of Fort Worth and part of the reasons that we're actually very concerned about managing our assets, we've got a population of 855,000. When I moved to Fort Worth 25 years ago, population of Fort Worth is around 250,000. So we continue to grow exponentially. We're about 343 square miles in size. So when you put this into perspective, we're actually the 16th largest city. So when you take a look at this from an asset management perspective, we've got lots of streets, sidewalks, street signs, traffic signals, and streetlights to maintain. And funding is always an issue. I know it's an issue for most municipalities and state entities. But when you compare us to other cities, we actually are the 16th largest in area as well, which makes us bigger than 7 of the 10 major cities in the country as far as area. So that means more lane miles, more pavement, more street lights, more traffic signals, more for us to manage. We're actually bigger than San Diego, San Jose, Austin, even Dallas, Philadelphia, Chicago, and New York City in area. So that means more of everything. So real quick today, I'm going to talk a little bit about asset management. I'm going to talk about the inventory we recently conducted, and then we implemented software, asset management software, in the end of November, beginning of December for streets. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So what is asset management? So asset management is a process. It's helping you make the right decisions throughout the life of the asset. You want to make sure that you're doing the right things from acquisition all the way to when you dispose of that asset. And that includes things like replacement, maintenance, operation, and rehabilitation of those assets. So when you look at asset management, and I'm not going to dive real deep, but there's actually 6 elements that make up asset management. And to actually have a full program, you would have to do all these things. I can't say that the city of Fort Worth has done all these things yet. We're working our way towards them. Starting at the bottom, Transportation and Public Works has recently built an inventory. We've spent time identifying not only the number of assets and where they're located, but also the condition of those assets. And that's kind of the first step. You also need to identify the criticality. So that's understanding the probability of failure and the consequences of failure for each of those assets. We have not done a lot of this for transportation at the moment. We have done some of this for our stormwater assets. And we are looking, we're actually implementing a module next week to start doing some of this for streets, curb and gutter, our bridges, and some of our end road barricades. So the other item of concern, another item is to look at is your service levels. And a lot of us in the GIS arena think of service levels as uptime or availability. It's sort of that, but it's a little bit different when you look at things like streets. For example, an arterial looks at things such as factors for the number of vehicles and the speed they can travel. Do you want to have low congestion and travel at an ideal speed if possible? So better understanding what you want those levels of service to be for each of those various assets. And this would vary. So on a street light or on a traffic signal, it might be the ability to clear all those vehicles in a number of cycles. I talked a little bit about asset condition. When we went out and did our survey for transportation and public works, we did collect the asset for the condition for all the assets that we collected. Optimal maintenance. So this is new stuff for the city of Fort Worth. We're not doing a great job of it. We're trying to learn more about it. But this is actually planning and making sure you execute preventive maintenance schedules. We are doing some in stormwater, and we inspect and clean all our inlets. So that's sort of a PM schedule. We have a cycle to try and accomplish that. So we're going to look at doing some of that in transportation public works. For example, our street signals, our traffic signals, they go out and inspect those. We want to make sure that we inspect them all annually, and we have over 800 of them. So we need to get in a process of doing this systematically. And then the last item is life cycle costing. So this is kind of understanding the entire life cycle of the asset, the costs that are associated with it, and making some decisions based on rehab and rehabilitation. So this slide is one of my favorite slides only because asset management can't be done without the help of everyone. It's a program in itself. You need management, you need engineering, and you need information. And without one of them, the structure is not going to be stable, won't stand. So you're not going to make good decisions. So if you're missing an understanding of the business strategy or overall idea of how the organization wants to function, you're not going to do a good job of managing those assets. The same goes if you don't know where those assets are. You can't exactly understand how to manage them appropriately. A lot of organizations, including the city of Fort Worth, have been making decisions for years based on gut instinct and the knowledge of a few people who happen to be out in the field. Sometimes that makes sense, and they definitely have information that's valuable, but there's a lot of other things that can be determined if you have more information. So next I'm going to kind of dive into the inventory we recently done for streets and for traffic management. When we did the inventory, we looked at pavement, curb and gutter. We looked at pavement markings and symbols. We looked at streetlights, signs, sidewalks, railroad signals, traffic signals, and poles, as well as the sidewalk ramp. So kind of just to give you a general idea, there's over 800,000 assets here, not including all the lane miles for pavement. So a lot of assets to manage and to understand. We spent a lot of time up front doing some planning. I'm a big fan of documentation, and I noticed there's quite a few out there who I actually know personally. Y'all know I like documentation. But as far as looking at documentation, we spent a lot of time up front identifying our data dictionary, determining what would be included. And this is actually the document on the right of your screen. We drilled down and identified what the domains would be, understood what information would be collected. And I want to point out that it was more than one meeting to sit down and do this. For streetlights, for traffic signals alone, we had over 5 meetings that lasted anywhere from an hour to 3 hours, depending on the group that was involved. Lots of back and forth, lots of adding, lots of cutting. We wanted to make sure that everything we did include was valuable and was easily maintainable and something that they actually needed. So we didn't want to waste money collecting stuff that wasn't important. We also put together, once we had the data dictionary done, a field guide. And this is over here, the document on your left. And you can see this is talking about traffic signal, and it talks about the various different types of traffic signals as far as how they're attached and how they're uprighted. in the intersection. So it was important for us to be on the same page as the people doing the inventory for us. We did do our inventory through a third party. So it was important that we were all on the same page. So our inventory lasted quite a while. They started collecting video. They drove a van around the entire city of Fort Worth, and they started collecting video in July. They did wrap up video the end of December, beginning of January, but then they actually went through and viewed all that video and collected the information and put the dots on the map and drew in the lines for us to have the full inventory as well as assess the condition. It took us until the beginning of October in 2017 to actually review all that data, and we did a pretty thorough quality control. So it wasn't a short task. We spent a lot of time on quality control. I want to point out these are all the different assets that were delivered. If you'll notice, there wasn't a single asset that we looked at once. Every one of them went back at some point for one reason or another. Ideally, I would have liked to have done a larger QC percentage. My goal was to try and hit about 10% for all of them, but those assets that were so big in size, it was very difficult. On some of them, we did do some analysis. For example, sidewalks, we actually went in and did some buffered the sidewalks against the streets to make sure information was right. So while it's maybe a small percentage, that's what we individually put our eyes on. We also did a lot of quality control through actually doing some GIS analysis. And I want to point out though that as we went through the iterations on our QC, I don't necessarily think it's the vendor's fault. I think there's a communication process that happens, and this is actually not the first time I've done an inventory, and I have never accepted a data set on a single deliverable. So that's just kind of my school of thought, is that I don't expect anything to be perfect. And it's not going to be perfect when we get it back either. So we're already doing updates and looking at things that need to be corrected. Some of the ways we actually did quality control was we actually created a viewer. One of the ladies that works with me, Katie, she put this together. It was very beneficial. It allowed us to not have to do QC ourselves. We actually were able to turn to the experts. So the people who understood and knew where their streetlights were able to go in and identify. This example here is looking at the pavement markings, and this is a crosswalk, and you can look over on the identify screen and see that they gave it a score of 75. So they said it was in good condition. You can see the crosswalk markings in the road. So they took a picture that was associated with each of them. The end user then was able to flag it as a pass or a fail. They were able to mark it that they did it and when they did it. And then if there were any comments they wanted to add, they could do that as well. So this allowed us to expand the number of people who did the QC, and then, like I said, bring in those who were the experts on the assets. While I know a lot about GIS, I don't know a lot about traffic signals, although I've been learning quite a bit. We also collected condition. So this is actually the condition of all the streets or the pavement. We collected what's called a PCI. This is an industry standard. It ranges between 0 to 100. It's a score. And the score then helped us identify, we marked everything that was excellent in blue. A dark green is good. There's a light green, and then the yellow, and then of course the red is poor. I do realize that that's not easy for people who are colorblind to see, so sorry about that. We also created an overall condition index, and this index took the information of the curb and gutter and or missing curb if there was no curb, and added it to the condition of the overall pavement. So we had a general idea of how that pavement was, not only just the pavement, but the curb and gutter surrounding it. And then for those assets that were not pavement related, we used what's called a simple condition rating. And basically, we either used good, fair, or poor. In one case, we did use excellent, good, fair, poor to describe those assets. We also defined what those things meant for each of those assets. So we knew up front that a good asset for a street light was that it was standing up straight, there were no loose wires, that it was that didn't need paint or repair, the foundation was good, and we understood those things up front. So that's kind of overall summary about the inventory we did. Next, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the software implementation we're undergoing right now. So, and I say undergoing because we've broken it into quite a few different phases, and we have implemented work orders for streets, but we are working on the rest of them. So, kind of just a little background about the city of Fort Worth. We have been working in the asset management arena since 2005. I think every year, over time, we've grown both in size and also complexity for our system. We've learned a little bit from each of those different systems. So in 2005, the water department purchased Maximo. They had been using it and still continue to use it. Then somewhere during that time frame, the streets created their own homegrown system, and they actually had a van that we owned and drove and collected asset information. Unfortunately, that program kind of died and went to the wayside. So it's kind of old information and stagnant, but we do still have access to that information. In 2013, we actually went live with Excella for stormwater. They did an inventory in 2009 and then set up a work order system in 2013. This was the first system that actually tied, from a mapping perspective, the GIS to those assets. Water has recently done that with Maximo, but when they originally implemented it, they did not have the assets linked to it. They actually just focused entirely on premise or basically the location of those calls. So in 2017, we went out, actually we started the process in 2016, but we went out and we purchased ViewWorks. It is our first attempt at doing an enterprise implementation. Several groups are on board. We've got streets, traffic management, facilities, and parks. So the first group to go live was streets, and they went live in November 29th of 2017. So what we had before we set out on this enterprise asset management journey, streets and traffic used what was called ITSM, and is not designed for asset management. It's purely a call-taking system. And they used it not only to take calls, but also to track work. So they were able to see the work come in, or the service request. They did include some costing, but not all groups. They were able to dispatch tickets to different groups, and they could also validate on an address, which was good. They wanted to, and they were able to report on the actual accomplishments for the work completed. But there were a lot of things missing, and some of the things that were identified that we needed were to track the work against those assets. They also wanted to assess the overall condition of those assets. So over time, we hope to continue to identify as those assets deteriorate and collect information on that. We wanted to be able to schedule that preventive maintenance I talked about previously, where we can go out and on a routine basis identify issues with our existing infrastructure. We want to utilize those condition information to assess risk and prioritize our work. So the areas that are at higher risk can actually get repairs or be addressed quicker. We wanted to be able to do a better job of forecasting our budget, to show the gaps in our shortfalls to council so they understand where we need additional information or additional funding. And then the decisions become theirs to understand where we can do repairs and where we can't if we don't have the information, or if we don't have the money. And then we wanted to provide an estimate of the overall value of our assets. We know we have a lot of assets. We had no idea how many when we didn't understand what those assets were worth. So this is going to give us the ability to do a better job of understanding that. The other item we wanted to do was we wanted to become mobile. We wanted to be able to push some of our work out to the field. That would help to free up our supervisors to do more of what they are supposed to be doing as far as managing, overseeing, and actually it would also help reduce some of our overhead costs. So when we set out on this journey, Transportation and Public Works sat down and we selected over 200 requirements, focusing on various areas, including the service requests, work orders, inventory, and mapping of the software, what it should look like and how it should feel, usability as far as the friendliness to the end user. Pavement management was a big piece of our decision, and we wanted to be able to understand the overall condition of those assets and make decisions and recommendations based on the information available. We wanted to do some reporting, and then again, we wanted to be mobile. So there was some specific information for each of those items that we focused on as far as requirements. So here's the timeline for the inventory I showed you previously. We set out in July to actually implement street. It took longer than anticipated. I think we needed to allow a little more time for defining our processes. We started in July and implemented the work order pieces in the end of November. I will say we spent a lot of time, we called it hypercare, but we spent a lot of time providing support and working with our end users so that they understood where they were gaps in information, what they were missing, how to do things. We spent a lot of hands-on time working with them. We still do. I have some of my team that's available at least one afternoon a week with each of the various locations. We have 4, well really 5 different locations for our staff, our field crews. We also are working on the asset management piece. And this was more than just the work orders. This is actually putting together the condition assessment forms. This is looking at the risk, overall the probability of failure and the consequences of failure. This is assigning some values to those assets and putting together different scenarios. And then the ability to generate an overall budget for the future, what it looks like to fix and repair all those assets. So we are actually hoping to roll that out next week. So I can't speak at the moment on how it's working or how things are looking in the long term. For it to actually be effective, it will take more than just a couple weeks to roll it out to get good, accurate information. It will take many years to build that information up through those work orders to get valuable information. One of the things we are doing in there is taking some of the information such as potholes, and we're going to apply the number of potholes repaired on the street to try and help make some educated decisions if we need to be looking at investing some money into those streets. So we're actually using information we're collecting to fuel and feed that those decisions. So just digging in a little bit deeper, because I think it's important to understand the different steps of a software implementation. We had to link the assets from the GIS into the work order system. We configured the service requests and work orders based on specific information we wanted to collect. We did some time reviewing the information and testing. We did some data conversion, so we brought all the old information over so that it's accessible in the existing system. We also did some training We spent quite a bit of time doing testing and rework. And then we did spend some time working on doing some additional training that was on the business processes during some of that testing. And then we went live. So that broke it down a little bit more in detail for you. And then as far as the advanced asset management, we did some time configuring the risk budget and reports as well as condition assessment. We did some training. We've been doing some testing over the last couple of weeks, and we hope to go live next week. This rollout's a little bit different because our user base is much smaller. Really, there's only going to be about 4 or 5 end users, so it's not as time sensitive. When we rolled out the work orders and the service requests, it took a lot more time to orchestrate. We had to cut over from the previous system to the new system. We spent the weekend reviewing information and making sure everything was standing up correctly. So very different in the way that they've been implemented. So I thought now I could give you kind of an overview of what the system looks like. I chose not to do a live demo as one. I didn't want to break any, I didn't want anything to break on me. But if there's specific questions, we can dig into those in a little bit. This is just a general overview of the VWorks software. You can see it gives you the ability to see the service requests identified by the S's and then the work orders. There's quite a few service requests out there that are open right now, as well as a couple of work orders. You can see the green pins. It does do have the ability to combine them if you've got multiple in an area, so you can drill down. Drilling down a little bit further, we've got the conditions I showed you previously. So blue being the best and red being the worst. I guess in this case it's yellow. If you'll notice, I've identified on one of the street segments here so that you can see some of the drill down information. You'll notice on this street it has a PCI score of 41. So it's downtown. It's probably one of the streets that's not in very good condition. It's probably one of our worst streets in downtown. We do spend a lot of energy and time trying to make sure the streets in downtown, because there's so much traffic downtown, are in good shape. You'll also notice right below it, there's an overall score as well. So when you add in the curb and gutter, it actually deteriorates the score a little bit and shows that the curbs are probably not in that good a shape as well, and gives it an overall score of 36. So that's kind of just a look at some of the pavement information. The software has the ability to do some filtering. So you can drill down and see various information. In this example here, I've looked at the northeast sector. So we break our city up into quads for work. And this is looking at the pothole repair tickets. So from November 29th until now, we've got 210 tickets out there. We can drill down even further and see if it's got some reporting capabilities on potholes. So I can drill down and look at the pothole report and identify that we have done 681 potholes since November 29th in just that sector. In this screenshot, most of them are manual, but we can break it out by mechanical, spray patcher, or if they didn't do any work for some reason. Maybe it's a larger issue than just a pothole and they need to do a base repair, or maybe it was repaired by one of the construction companies in the area. If a company is doing construction, they mess up the road, they're required to fill the pothole. So in some cases that may be the case. So things along those lines. But that's just a general reporting. It's dynamic and allows you to drill down based on each of the various filters you have. So that's a little bit of the reporting. Obviously, we've got quite a few reports out there if you'll take a look, helping us drill down into various information. So this is just looking at a work order. You'll notice that this is actually a street repair ticket. We have all different types of activities. We have pothole tickets, we have hauling material, we have street repair, which will drill down and give us information on base and pavement repair, as well as reconditioning and then doing a blade overlay. So in this example, they did what's called an asphalt level up, and they did 206 square yards. So this is how they collect the accomplishments that they did or the work that they can report back on. If you drill down into the software, they collect the labor. You'll notice they did this over 2 days. It was Valentine's Day, and the following day they worked on this with several different crew members. We collected equipment, so they've got some of the equipment that was used. We do store equipment based on an hourly rate. And then inventory, we actually included the inventory here, so they used some asphalt as well as some tubes as well, or gallons of pavement, I guess. And then they attached it to the specific assets. So they chose the block range from 3,700 to 3,899 on Northern Cross Boulevard. So when you rolled up the cost of all the different information, we found out that this particular project, it's a small project for us. It's going to ran us about $2,800. And then, of course, you can drill down and add documents. You can add photos. You can add plans. You can add whatever you take a photo of from your napkin scratch drawing. Here, there's actually a picture of them doing the level up. So they're repairing the street. So that's kind of the overall of the work order information that can be collected. I did want to show real quick the condition assessment. There's a lot of information that was collected on the streets, and you can drill down. While I showed you earlier the PCI score, there's a lot of additional information you can see over here on the left. This particular street we looked at had alligator cracking and some longitudinal cracking as well. You can see there's 3 distressed areas. We saw the score of 52 earlier. So there it is again. And then we can go in and assign our own new condition form. And so our intent is over the next couple years to do some sort of windshield inspections, not near as detailed, but collect some information as the assets change, or to update based on the work that we've done over time. So if we go in and do an overlay on the entire street, it's going to be in much better condition than a 52. So we'll reevaluate that and put a new score for it. So that's kind of the high level of the ViewWorks software that we use. Like I said, the city's worked with quite a few different softwares, not necessarily endorsing any one software. This is just a specific project we're working on. I did want to touch on a couple of the high level things we learned along the way. One, during training, we did iPads for a mobile device, and we found that working with smaller groups made a lot more sense. We originally started out with, I believe, 25 people in the room, and that was way too big. I think ideally in the future, we'd like to use groups 6 or 7, maybe 8, no more than that. We did schedule some playtime on the iPad. They were actually able to learn how to use the device, set up their email, look at the weather, and play a few games. Some of our advanced users really didn't think it was beneficial. However, I think some of our users who'd not spent a lot of time on smart devices did think it was helpful. So they were able to do a few things and learn just about, swiping on the screen and tapping and double tapping and things like that. We also determined that we really needed to conduct a separate training for the business process. So ViewWorks team came in and they did training for all our staff but they trained on the software. They did not train on the business process. And so we did do some business process training during the testing, but we found that we really in the future probably need to do an additional round of testing step by step. This is how it all works to make it pull together much smoother for go live. Some of the things that we did as far as support, we created cheat sheets for the mobile users. We actually laminated those and sent them out in the field. The field crews indicated they were very helpful. We did realize that we needed to better address the backups for the supervisors. So making sure that there was a plan in place for when a supervisor was out of the office. We did determine that we needed to have some additional time for documenting our business processes, more for that training piece so that the supervisors and the end users could see exactly what was going on. And then we also decided in the future we really wanted to have that vendor on site. They were available remotely the whole day. Some of that was on us as we pushed back our implementation, but I really think in the future I would prefer to wait until they're actually here. And then one of the things that we found was we went and purchased our field equipment before we had drilled down into the processes quite a bit. And I think in the future, we will better understand those processes before we actually purchase the field equipment. In some cases, we might have done a different solution. So some of our backup employees, we might have done a full-blown version of ViewWorks for them in the field versus the iPads because the functionality was somewhat limited on the mobile devices. So those are kind of the high level. We've got a detailed list that's got some more information if you're interested. So I think we're still in the stages of we haven't seen all the things that the benefits we're going to reap from this, but we do hope to use less paper, and we're seeing some of that already. Definitely want some better reporting. The reporting with our old system was difficult to access, and we were limited on the ability to actually create any of those reports ourselves. We want to provide better customer service to our citizens. We want to be able to understand and communicate to various entities or groups the overall condition of our assets. We want to be able to give real-time updates so that our supervisors can see when tickets are done or information is complete. And we want to be able to do some better planning and coordination as far as doing some preventive maintenance, so becoming more proactive versus being reactive. So I kind of just like this slide, and I mentioned previously, we've been working from intuition and some of our experience, but now we're going to add in that information component and make better decisions. And I kind of thought this little quote was very applicable. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. So we need to make sure we have all the information before we make decisions. And I think that's it for me.
Okay. Well, Elizabeth, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. This is Brian King. I'm the host and moderator, board member of URS Texas. And we got some questions here, if you don't mind me reading them off to you. And if anybody else has a question, put it in the chat window. Yes, we are recording this presentation. It'll be posted up to our YouTube channel here later this afternoon. Elizabeth Allen has a question. There's a couple on ViewWorks. Is ViewWorks compatible with the latest version of RTS Desktop? And I assume, I assume Allen means 10.6 or 10.5.
I'm not sure that we're on version 10.3, and really it's just Arc Server that interfaces. So we're using Arc Server to interface.
Alan, I think someone here at URS Texas can probably help you out there. We'll find an answer to that and get back to you if you want to send us an email. Let's see here. Morgan asked your question is, where do your equipment rates come from?
So that's a great question, actually. We have a system called Faster, and originally it's a fleet software used to manage fleet assets. And we originally pulled the information from that, and then we used information like the cost of the vehicle and the maintenance on the vehicle, as well as the fuel. I will say that some of our equipment is so old. We do keep our equipment for extremely long periods of time that the numbers didn't work out real well. So we ended up shifting directions, and we're using the FEMA rates. And actually, that screenshot you saw there did not include those, but we're going to use the FEMA rates at a sort of a prorated amount because our equipment is not new. So that's where we're going to be getting our costs for our equipment.
Okay. Let's see here. Scott has a quick question. We've got about, 17 minutes to the top of the hour to 1 Central. Which other vendors were considered before you came to a final decision with ViewWorks? And you did mention that you tried multiple software through the years.
Yeah, so in this round of selection, facilities, parks, and transportation public works all work together. And we looked at Excella, CityWorks, Facility Dude, ViewWorks, and Cartograph.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. We've got a bunch of questions, so I'm going to roll through them here. Alan asked how are asset IDs assigned, and can they be imported if older systems have existing IDs?
So we are assigning our assets using the Attribute Assistant tool within GIS. So it automatically assigns it when an asset is created. The second question was, what was the second question?
I think it was kind of one. It just was how are asset IDs assigned, and can they be imported if older systems have existing IDs?
I mean, ViewWorks actually allows you to use whatever format for the ID you want, so I would think they could be.
Okay, perfect. Scott asked, you mentioned that other city departments were also using ViewWorks. Can you comment on where they are in their implementation schedule?
Yeah, so Parks right now is actually going out to do their inventory. As we speak, they started driving the parks and collecting that information this weekend. Facilities has done their inventory, and they are in the process of configuring the software right now with the vendor. And I believe they're supposed to roll out in late April, I believe.
Okay. Well, we have another ViewWorks question here. Eric asked, is ViewWorks assessing GIS data through map services, or enterprise database connections, or standalone file geodatabase?
It's using map services.
Okay. Patrick Young is one of our board members. He has a question. Patrick, I unmuted you if you want to ask it, or I can type it in, but go ahead.
Sure. I was just curious how difficult it was for you, Elizabeth, to get the financial backing to support the implementation plan. And is there more that you had wanted to do that you didn't get to do?
That's a good question. I was luckily very fortunate to have some key stakeholders who are very invested in this, and they did most of the legwork. And we have a new city manager, relatively new, and he actually came in a couple years ago and created a group that focused on assets. Now, not specifically transportation type assets, but internal assets, so facilities and fleet. He very much felt it was important to understand what we owned and depreciate it, and so that really helped drive some of this overall. So luckily, we were able to get some funding pretty easily. I do think there are some things that we would like to do down the road that were not included, but I think that kind of happens with most projects, so okay. Future phases to come.
Good question, Patrick. I'm going to leave you unmuted in case you have anything else, Patrick. Ollie, you had an update on a further question. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you if you want to jump in.
Oh, all it was that we're currently looking at ViewWorks, and we know that it works with at least 10.5. I'm not sure about 10.6 though.
Okay.
Although you are using a map or a service, you're not actually using ArcGIS. So if that helps anybody.
No, it's perfect. So I'm going to leave you and Patrick unmuted so you can jump in. Jordan has a comment. We got about 12 minutes to the top of the hour. Jordan says, I had heard that y'all were planning on integrating the Waze, W-A-Z-E, live data feed to automatically generate work orders. Is this still in the works?
It's funny, I've heard a lot about that recently, and I haven't heard a thing about it. I do think that it might be part of we're implementing a new CRM system.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be part of the service request piece.
Okay.
For that CRM, but it will not be coming directly into ViewWorks. We haven't planned anything for that.
Okay. Lane has a quick question here. Do the asset conditions automatically deteriorate over time, or does the condition reported stay the same until the street is assessed again? Or assessed again?
I think you can actually use depreciation curves to reduce the value over time. So there is depreciation curves built in that will do some of that. I am not an expert on that piece though.
Okay. Scott furthers a question here. Is the source of asset data kept with ViewWorks or on a GIS system?
It's kept on the GIS system, and this has actually been a big topic at the City of Fort Worth recently. And we talked to ViewWorks, and they felt it was best practice. We also talked to Excella about it as well, and they agreed that it was best practice to keep it in the GIS.
Okay. Elizabeth, I see your question here. I'll follow up with you offline. I'd be happy to help out with your question. Let's see here. Let's see, Morgan followed up here. We use the FEMA rates too. I guess that was from a further rate question. And then we got Ralph here. How hard was the transition to a new asset system for group? The company I worked for had one late last year, and there was a lot of anxiousness, but wasn't sure how it applied to your group. This was a great presentation. Okay, thanks, Ralph.
So what was he asking again?
How hard was the transition to a new asset system for your group?
You know, overall, I've done it twice now with two different groups, and I have to say I've been really pleased at their ability to change. And I think some of that was, I do think some of that is setting the stage up front. You know, our primary stakeholders came in and said, this is happening, whether you like it or not, so no whining. But I also was pleasantly surprised by some of the people who I thought would be the ones who struggled with it more, just from a technology standpoint, actually embraced it. We had one guy coming to us and asking us for additional functionality because he wanted to do additional reporting and additional things. So I was pleasantly pleased. I do think some of it was building rapport with them and getting to understand them and what they wanted, not just trying to shove something down their throat.
Yeah, that's been my experience in the past too. So Mike says, how much customization is part of the ViewWorks solution?
So I think that's a great question because ViewWorks is very easy, in my opinion, to customize, but it is not extremely customizable. So you can customize it to some degree, but there are other systems that in my mind are way more customizable. So from an ease of use, it's pretty easy to customize. From how much can be customized, I felt like it doesn't have as much as other software. So I think it's a matter of what you're really trying to accomplish. If you are adamant that you have to do something a certain way and it doesn't come out of the box that way, then you need something that's extremely customizable. From a maintenance perspective, though, ViewWorks is going to be great because it doesn't require a lot of customization. And when we test for upgrades and stuff in the future, I think the testing is going to be a lot easier than on a system where we've built lots of customization.
Okay. Danny Haverlaw asked a question. He's one of our board members as well. Danny, I unmuted you if you want to ask it, or I can read it off here if you're around.
You can go ahead and read it.
All right. All right. I believe you, Danny asked, I believe you mentioned that at one point in time you were all using Maximo for asset management. Do you still integrate Maximo into your current workflows? If not, why did you move away from Maximo? And kudos on the great presentation.
So the city is still using Maximo. The water department and water and sewer actually use it for their piece. So they're very much a separate entity. Maximo is pretty expensive. So when stormwater and TPW and facilities started looking, it priced itself out of the market.
Okay.
We just couldn't afford it. But it is still being used in water and sewer. And it actually, when they bought it, it worked really well with the horizontal assets, so working well with the treatment plant.
Okay. We have time for one more here, I believe. Mark, make sure I get this right here. Does the asset management system interfere with any other enterprise systems, such as financing or permitting? If so, and assuming those systems are from other vendors, what can you say about the integration effort?
That's a great question. We actually interface with PeopleSoft, which is our ERP system, and so we bring in our employees that way and their rates, and we're using a burden rate. We're not actually bringing over their actual salary. We're using a multiplier to include their benefits and overhead. And then we're also interfacing right now with what is ITSM, which is the call center software, but it will soon be a new CRM. We're implementing Motorola for our call center. So I think overall the interfaces went pretty smoothly. I didn't do a lot as far as the PeopleSoft interface. It was mostly controlled by IT, and it went pretty well. We did the testing of it, and I worked a lot on the interface with the call center software, ITSM, and it was pretty straightforward as far as mapping, what field went to which field in the new system. So it was pretty straightforward.
Okay. Well, great presentation. I think we're getting very close here. Want to go ahead and thank Elizabeth for taking the time with us today. Got a few things we're going to roll over here. At the height, I believe I got 104 people total. Ollie, you can jump in and correct me. I know she watches it well, but a lot of people in attendance. And
Yeah, no, it was 104.
okay, so yeah, great job. And we will have this exported out and posted to our YouTube channel later today, and we'll make sure to send a link out to everybody. Ollie, do you want to go ahead and announce some of our upcoming events for next month?
Sure. First off, I'm going to start with our next Mappy Hour. That'll be in Corpus Christi on March 22nd. It's going to be at the Brewster Street Ice House. So visit our website at uristatexas.org to check that out. And then on March 27th, we're going to have our next speaker series. And this is going to be Lessons Learned Developing a UAS Program for Local Government. So Mark Bowie, our GIS coordinator here at the City of Mesquite, created a drone program from scratch. And he's going to go over what he had to do, lessons learned, pitfalls, how he overcame problems, all the research he went over, laws you have to keep in mind when doing this. So that should be a really interesting presentation. And again, that will be March 27th.
Okay. Once you go to our website, by all means, if you want to join up and be a member, it's free. Please do so. We can add you to the mailing list and make sure you're getting all the notifications for the upcoming events. So definitely please register. Trying to think anything else here, Patrick. I want to thank your board members. We got Patrick Young from ACOM, Chris Akins from Dunaway, we got Ollie Powers from City Mesquite, and I'm Brian King from Freeze and Nichols, and like I mentioned, Chris Aiken from Dunaway, I believe, but everybody's in attendance today, and so we work hard to volunteer at University of Texas to help bring this to you. So anybody has any other questions, by all means, send them to our website, and we'll be happy to maybe pass them on to Elizabeth to get them answered for you. But we're pretty much here. So Elizabeth, we're going to let you get back to work, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. I appreciate it.